Now we just need to send that out to them. How do I get?
We should be able to get the link from this guy. So,
Okay.
log into your Gmail.
Well, it's not. I have to go to.
Sorry.
That's okay. Because I don't have all of their email addresses in there. It's gonna be, maybe I can email that link to myself because everything else is stored there. Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. On. Okay, how do I do this? I want to send, oh, there. Okay. Oh, I hate, can you help me with
Yeah,
this link?
of course.
I'm used to a Mac.
The shortcuts are a little funky. That should be a good link.
Thank you. All right, and I can just do link. Okay, I need to send it to myself here. Okay. Over here. Sorry, we're just a little bit delayed. We'll get started soon. Dr. Barsh is over there redirecting. Hi, we lost our link, so we're sending a new link out to the online group. So that just went out to them. Let me see what happens when we go to an old link, just to make sure.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like it's on. That's the old link.
I think it might have only recorded for a few minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I see.
And then for whatever reason it shut down.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Yes.
These computers are a real tricky thing.
You think it's
Hopefully it got working now.
Okay, so we need to sign back in now, right? So
We're all good. We're
okay,
streaming.
on. Okay.
We're live. We're all good.
We just need people to find us.
Yes.
Now,
It looks
I
like we've
wonder-
got a couple of people watching now.
Okay, good.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Now I'm gonna try to get in there. I wonder, I can't even really put anything on that.
You might be able to comment on the post. If you add a public comment, you can say like, look at your email to find a new
I think I can put the new link right there, right?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Okay.
So we've got a couple of people
Okay.
joining on. People are
Okay,
messaging
great.
you.
Okay,
Got it.
good.
It's up again. Can they hear us?
Let me double check.
Yeah. Or check, make sure. Yeah. Awesome. Oh, they heard me ask. Perfect.
Yay! All right.
Awesome. Is there anything else? The computer looks like it's working all right for you
Yeah,
guys.
that's working. It's advancing. I'll not worry about this. So too many moving parts. I'll get confused.
I'll just be sitting in that hot corner.
Okay.
If anything happens,
Okay.
I'll be here.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. All right. Okay. I think we're gonna get started because we're ready. I think. Yeah. Yeah. Let me move this around a little bit. Okay. So I think we have a couple people online and us here. So that'll work. We can get started, I guess.
Yeah, do we need to be up in front here?
I think, well, wherever this is kind of,
Okay. Right in here.
yeah, but then you're in front of the slide.
So you have to kind of,
Yeah, exactly.
everybody online.
Here, we'll try to zoom into you. Come stand here so I know where you're my
Okay.
placeholder.
Can you guys see what it looks like?
Yeah, kind of, except I think.
Thanks for
over here.
being patient with us, folks.
That's out. There we go. Okay. So one thing that's I'd like you to do, if you haven't already done so, is download the slides because there's some live links that are in the slides themselves. So everyone online too, if you can download slides, that way you don't have to depend on seeing our screen. You can kind of see us, I guess. I wonder if that, all right, that would work. Let me just move this a bit. It just looks like a side angle. Maybe that's better. Huh?
No,
I
okay.
know. All right.
Good.
Okay, we are ready to go. So I wanted to give you guys, Dr. Barshan, I wanted to give you information about cycle 2. So I have a trick question before we start. How many of you have submitted cycle 1? Yay. Yay. I should have brought candy as a reward. Good job. All right, so you are ready to go, ready to put your head into cycle 2. That's wonderful. The rest of you, I really encourage you to get that one behind you because cycle 2 is a little, in my opinion, it's a little more involved, just a bit. So it's still doing everything you're already doing in the classroom, planning full units probably at this point because you're full-time teaching, right? Most of you, unless you've just switched placements if you're multiple subjects. Who's in the room? Can you tell me like which credential you're going for over here? What do we got? Bed. Okay. I knew that was my sped group over here. All right. And your sped too, right? And multiple subjects. So you've just switched placements. All right. So you're quick getting to know your new people. And then are you going to be doing cycle 1 with your new group?
Cycle 2 is my new group.
Okay. And you got all the data you need for the first one. Okay. Great. And online, guys, I'm going to be speaking to everybody. Sorry. That's my alert for my, never mind. Too complicated. So cycle 2 is really the same teaching cycle. It's just focusing on assessment rather than your differentiation. Cycle 1 really looked at 3 focus students. This time we still have 3 going on. It's just 3 different kinds of assessments that are embedded in your sort of mini unit that you're developing with the.
Does it have focus?
It does not have focus students. You're going to be analyzing 3 different students' work, but for a different purpose. So we'll get there, okay? So similar to before, you're planning, teaching, reflecting, and applying that knowledge. So same kind of steps. So, but they just want to make sure that you can plan based on the standards, assess the students' achievements of those standards, and then make decisions about how the students did in that assessment data. And again, here in this link is all of your assessment guides and forms. So that'll take you to a Google folder based on which assessment you're taking, so that has all of the materials that you're going to need for cycle 2 there. Just remember, you have to be in your APU email to get in, otherwise it'll deny you access. Some questions so far? All right, and let me look here. Would you mind watching them while I
Sure.
talk, and then we'll switch if there's any questions that they have.
Yeah.
For online, if you want to put questions in the chat, and Dr. Varsh and I are going to trade places sometime, so you'll be able to see you there. All right, so we're looking at 3 different assessments: informal assessment, student self-assessment, and formal assessment in this cycle. So just as a review about what each of those things are, we're going to give you a little bit of information. Informal assessment is sort of that assessment that you're doing all the time as you're teaching, as you're asking student questions, observing the level of engagement, watching what they're doing as you're giving a lesson or asking them to practice what you've just showed them. It can also be part of their interruptions. Okay, it's in the moment feedback that you're giving to students, right? So as they turn in assignments to you, you're analyzing those and you're giving student feedback back. Right? And this again is sort of while you're teaching or immediately, kind of after. All that informal stuff to do. So it could be homework, warm-up tickets, or warm-ups, exit tickets, as students turn and talk to each other and you're listening in to see if they're getting it. It's all that kind of stuff. And then what they're wanting to see is as you're teaching and doing that, asking those questions, and then students are answering you, responding, you're going to be giving students feedback about how they're doing and adjusting your teaching based on students in the moment answers to you. Make sense? Okay. And then, student self-assessment. We really want students to be engaged learners and be able to kind of evaluate for themselves if they're understanding something. And sometimes for our students, we're having to teach them how to do this. I've noticed that in our special education classes, we do this a little bit less. We don't ask our students to self-assess. So that might be something to work on, beginning to teach them how to do that. It can be as simple as like something that we use in elementary school is Fist to 5, but you can call it something else in high school, where you're wanting students to reflect on their own learning and objectively, safely reflect. So a Fist to 5 is just like, for example, if I'm teaching you all, how many of you feel like you have a pretty good understanding of informal assessment after our last side? Fist to 5. 5 being I'm an expert, I could kind of explain it to friends and teach it. 4, pretty good. 3 is I'm getting there, and 1 is I'm completely lost. Go ahead and show me where you're at. Okay, all right, good enough, good enough. So that I can just glance around and based on that, know who I might want to go check in on, you know, and give a little bit more support to. So that would be an example of a student self-assessment. It can also be sort of on an exit ticket. How do you think, what was the, what's one question you still have, or what's something that you learned today? That would be an example of a student assessment as well. Or if you ask them, you know, how do you think your learning is going, and they make a comment or rate themselves, again, self-assessment. Formal assessment is those quizzes, those checkups, those written things that we give to students throughout a unit, or a summit. It can be a summative assessment at the end of a unit to see how they're doing. These are more formalized, so you're collecting the information and analyzing that information in order to plan the next few lessons. So the results of formal assessment are used to plan the next lesson and to give feedback. So if I gave you a quiz, which I actually kind of did do, right? I gave you the materials for cycle 2 and gave you a little quiz. I could analyze that quiz and see, in fact I did last night, looked at how many people took it, how many people got most of the answers right, and if they were getting answers wrong, what were those answers? So how can I correct and make sure that this group today live got the correct information, that they weren't in error. So that would be an example of analyzing your formal assessment to know, okay, now I'm going to make sure I emphasize this in my next lesson because I saw a couple of errors in these questions, right? So an example of formal assessment. These can be materials from your teacher guides. So if you're using a curriculum, remember that's okay too. You can use that as a guide to see if you're doing math, for example, what's the typical progression of lessons with the scope and sequence. And then of course you're also going to cite that you used some of those lessons or you use that assessment, that's fine too. But you never want to just pull it out of the book and say, here it is, because the writer of that textbook doesn't know your kiddos. And there's, to be honest, there's not always a lot of UDL differentiation in those things. So that's the great thing that you're going to do is take that material and modify it to your needs in your classroom. The pacing might be a little bit different, and add in things that will make it more applicable to the students in your room, their cultural backgrounds or whatever. So if there is a quiz embedded in your curriculum, you can use that, just cite it and adjust it if you need to. That's okay too, right? And then just explain why you do that. Questions about formal self-assessment? Okay. What I'd like you to think about is the lessons that you're going to be developing 3 to 5 lessons. Most people do 3. And so think about, this isn't a whole unit. It's just a part of it. Unless it falls at the end, then you might be able to use the summative assessment from the text. Otherwise, you're going to pull questions to create a quiz or something like that for the formal. Or a project. It doesn't have to be paper, pencil things. It could be a poster or some other thing that you want to create to collect students' knowledge about your lessons. So think about what lesson you're going to be teaching this time around. And I'll make sure everyone understands this. If you're SPED of submitting multiple subject assessment, or obviously for multiple subject, whatever you did for cycle 1, you're going to do the opposite for cycle 2. So in other words, if you did literacy EL for cycle 1, you're going to need to do math for cycle 2. If you did math, you're going to need to do language arts for cycle 2. Okay, so you already have your subject in mind based on cycle 1. if you have an idea of the lessons that you want to do, have those in your mind and think about these. What would be some ideas of how you would be doing informal student self-assessment and formal assessment? And go ahead and turn to each other and just sort of brainstorm ideas. What could you use? And if you're online, there is a, in your slide, it says online participants collaborate here. If you go to that link, it's a shared document where you guys can type together your ideas about informal and student self-assessment and formal assessment, and then keep that document as collaboration, okay? Thank you.
So the question is collaborative links. Isn't it you vote only? I'm not sure. Should we send them a link to collaborate?
The link for this, that they might not be able to like edit whatever the online participation thing that you have here is.
Tammy, do you know, they said that the collaborative links are not only the view only mode.
If it's on a Google Doc,
It might be Google Doc.
Yeah, it's a Google Doc.
then it might be that they can't interact or like edit the profile.
I'll just send them that.
Yeah, of
Thanks,
course,
Nicole.
of course, that's what I'm here for.
All right. There you go. Go ahead.
I was like, time to look over here.
Yeah. Rita.
Oh, maybe.
We'll just turn it. How's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I tend
think-
to look here because everyone's
I think
sitting there.
we're right there.
Okay.
What do you think?
Sitting
Let me
elsewhere,
change it.
but-
At least we'll look that way.
Yeah.
Here's your coffee, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Angel.
Or answering some questions.
And I just kept going. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You know what?
Good.
This is this is good because you know what you're.
Where are we next?
So the next is step one, if I'm not mistaken, or UDL. No. It's, I don't need to be. I'm answering questions and doing stuff.
Okay.
Good. No, you're good. You're killing me.
I think so, yeah.
I think that way it helps us to see.
See, the problem is I'm facing these books, and so they're always away
It's a
from them.
little awkward that you're not looking at everyone that's watching.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that was okay if I needed to help.
No, I think good. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think we got it.
Yeah.
But,
They're saying something about, do we have to have one type of this? Oh, Laura, did you send it to Rocio? Oh, they're looking for the link, I guess, for the Google Hangout, but that's that's that slide, right? So you can
link
click
to
on
the-
that online participant.
oh, yeah. No, well, that's to the collaboration about these things.
Yes, right now.
Are they asking for the
Because it says,
slides?
do you have one type of assessment? That's another question. Laura, did you send it? Where's the question at?
I sent the link to them
I put the
yesterday
link
to
in the
slides.
chat.
Okay,
Maybe you can copy and paste it. I need the link to the slides.
okay. They were emailed. If you're looking for slides, they were emailed yesterday or day before. That's how y'all got them, right? Yeah.
Slides
Email.
were emailed yesterday,
Yeah, the link.
and that was on, what was it, from SOE?
Yeah.
From SOE, what was it? SOE.
Yeah.
TPA.
This title link to online CalTPA Workshop material at the very bottom. We can just point that out. at the very
Okay.
bottom.
Okay, thank you. The
Okay.
title was what again?
Link to.
Online CalTPA Workshop.
TPA, APU. Link to online TPA, APU.
Workshop and material.
Thank you.
Not that it matters, but you
Okay,
Oh.
thanks.
link to the APU CalTPA Workshop.
Perfect.
Let them know at the very bottom.
No, I don't. Hey, we just have to be, no, we just have to be flexible because the room change and I'm happy to do this in a way because the thing of it is, yeah, we're flexible. We're good,
So
honestly.
after UDL, we're switching. And then you
Let me
go
see.
as long as you want.
No. I'm good. I'm so good. I'm just happy to support. I always feel like you're doing the load, like a lot of the stuff that goes on the, I don't even know what, but it's all the tabs of like where students are at in the program and who's submitting
Yeah.
what. I'm like, thank you, Tammy.
Well,
Yeah,
Evan's
so-
taking that from me now.
So it's
Yeah,
like,
man. I do a lot of the, I'm answering emails and doing all that stuff and like, and I feel like we're doing it.
Well, and some people end up just emailing who they know.
We're actually kind of debating over like a journal activity. Would that be a student self-assessment or would that be just a formal assessment?
It could actually be, if it was, I'm thinking, and Dr. Barsh, jump in here, if it's a sort of a journal, I would think of that as a kind of either the informal, because you're going to collect that at the end of the day or end of a couple days and give back to them in a journal. We've done that too before in writing. And then the more formal use would be, can they apply what they reflected on to a product? Maybe it's a paragraph that they're writing or an essay. But maybe along the way they're turning in a outline or they're turning in kind of a draft when we need feedback. I'm thinking that would be more informal assessment and then your final product.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think also too, to add to that, when you think about your formal assessment and folks online as well, is it's almost with the idea that students knew in advance how you were going to assess them, right? So if there was, because in a formal assessment, there's a scoring guide or there's a rubric. Does that make sense? It's more formal. That's hence the word formal. And so if students are privy to that and have that in advance and know how this is going to be graded, if at all, then that would be more in the formal sense. Whereas most informal assessments aren't always technically graded. Does that make sense? In other words, it's used for feedback to the student and for the teacher to know, hey, where students at. But I don't know if that clarifies your. Folks online, can you hear the questions that are being posed? If you'll type something in for me, maybe Gina. What are the questions do y'all have?
Anyone in the room or online working with students with mod severe disabilities? If you have questions, because sometimes those will come up, but how does this apply to my students who aren't verbal, for example? How would I do a self-assessment with that group? So for those of you who might be looking at it later, I've seen people successfully do a choice where students are asked, do you feel like are you able to XYZ, happy face, sad face, thumbs up, thumbs down, Now, again, you might have to teach that if that's not used often in your classroom, what you mean by that, to understand. Can you find all the words that start with C? How are you feeling about finding all the C words? Good, not good. Can you do it? Can you not do it? So you're really just sort of simplifying to choice, and that can be a visual happy face or words, and you might kind of need to adapt it for students individually. Some people can give you a sentence, some people are going to be able to just give you a point to a choice card or something like that. And that's fine as well. But it's great to start to include that for students. All right, any other questions about assessment? So we'll move on. So as with
Another question came up online and asked the question, does there need to be one assessment per lesson? In other words, can it only come from one lesson and then, the informal assessment from another one? And it's not necessarily so, but our thinking is that you're not going to have all of them in one lesson. That would seem too cumbersome for students, especially when the formal assessment is more formal in nature, right? And it usually happens after you get feedback of how students are doing, right? We don't just give a test just because it's Friday. So I would argue that they probably will come from different lessons, but it is possible to have a informal assessment and a self-assessment of the students in that same lesson. That is possible. But it's not necessary that there's one in each of those, 3 to 5 lessons. Does that clarify things?
And you will be videotaping your feedback to students. So that's kind of the informal assessment piece. As you're teaching, you're making decisions, and they want to see that on film. And that can come from any of your lessons. When they're talking about, there's multiple videos, we'll get there for this one, but they don't all have to be a single lesson. You can kind of jump around there.
So we're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but these are good questions from our online folks, and that is, do the assessments have to be videotaped? And the answer to that is not necessarily. Sure, it's great to capture that, but keep in mind that if students are doing the traditional pencil paper, right, kind of assessment, I don't know that that video clip is necessarily demonstrating much about your teaching skills or monitoring students and the like when you think about those requirements, right, that you're supposed to capture and annotate. So, Dr. Backrack, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I don't know that it's necessary that you capture that assessment. I think, that formal assessment. I think the self-assessment might be a great one to capture, or even the informal for sure. But I don't know that the formal is one that you need to capture via a video recording.
So like with cycle 1, in order for you to score in a higher level score, you're going to need to use UDL strategies. So on the rubric itself, which is part of that assessment guide, if you look, 5, you must have UDL, a score of 5 in any particular area. You have to have a UDL component, which is best practices anyway. So we've already kind of reviewed Universal Design for Learning guidelines. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it focuses really on giving students a variety of ways that they're gathering information auditorily, visually, tactily, and hands-on or using movement. You're looking at engagement, multiple ways of engaging students. This is where knowing your students, which there's that component in this assessment too. The first step is getting to know your students. Know that what interests them, what motivates them, tying those interests into your lesson, setting kind of that anticipatory setup for engagement with them to pull their interests in would be another example of using UDL strategies to engage your students in multiple ways. The other one is how they're going to interact with the material or show you what they know. Again, you want multiple means of representation. It doesn't have to be just all paper content. It could be an action, it could be a skit, it could be a variety of different things that they're using for action and expression. Welcome. So I did want to point out, that there is a link well. So not just this graphic kind of gives you a flyover. it describes that principle and some things that you would see in a classroom using UDL strategies. It really digs in and gives you some really great examples. It's a long document, so just go to the principle section. You know, it justifies all the research and all that. You don't know that probably. But if you go there, use it as a resource to see examples of what UDL would look like in a classroom. So that's kind of all we're gonna delve into that, but it's a great resource for you. Okay? All right. Your turn.
Okay.
Or is this my turn? I don't know. I forget. We
This
can
one is
switch.
mine.
Good.
Yes. All right.
Yay.
All right. I think you do a whole lot better job than I do.
Oh, no,
So.
I didn't want variety here.
Hey, folks, just regarding the UDL, keep in mind that this is what separates students scoring a 3, which is, you know, a lot of times barely passing, as opposed to a 4 and a 5. If you look at the rubrics carefully, you'll notice that, look at that continuum of the rubric, it's the UDL that shifts students from a 3-ish over to 4 and 5. So you really want to make sure that you're intentional about including those UDL strategies, especially in light of your focus students, okay? As well as just the class profile. Okay, in other words, really be explicit about why you're implementing those strategies, both with process, product, and content. So online folks, I hope you caught that. As you guys have questions, again, let us know, because what we'll do is we'll repeat those questions because our online folks aren't always hearing them. So before we go any further, let me share with you guys, I think, an analogy or an illustration that really helps to solidify the work that you have ahead of you. I think for a lot of us that have come here today and are doing the TPA, it can seem like, you know, dog and pony show, right? Like we're just kind of doing this. I just need to get my credential. And I understand that, but remember, we always want to do what's best for students. You guys have students in your classrooms that need you doing what's best for them. And even though there are some steps that you need to take your students along, I want to remind you to keep your why ever present before your mind. That when you think about assessing students, it's not something we have to do. The word test is not a 4-letter word, right? But it's a way for us to capture what students know. And listen carefully, it's as much for them as it is for you as a teacher, right? Because, you know, how do you know where they're at? How do you know where you're going? You know? And a very quick illustration I've shared with students before is this. It's a roadmap. That's what it is. Assessment is a roadmap. And so if you think about it in terms of a diagnostic test, right? Y'all with me? That is, where do students start at? All right, because if I'm going to Mexico, for me to get on the 5 north isn't going to help me very much, right? Okay, I need to go south. Well, that's great if we're living north of the border, but for students who are from Colombia, okay, or England or whatever, they're going to come from different directions. And so one of the things that the TPA folks are asking you to do is to consider, who are my students, which we'll get into right now. Where are we starting, right? And so that's what you're going to need to kind of address is, where are they? Who are my students before I just kind of jump into the content? Because we easily do that, don't we, right? We got things to do, places to go. We got to get them on the learning bus. Problem is we peel out the parking lot in the learning bus, kids are left behind. So I want you to kind of think again that this whole process of assessment is not merely an exercise in, you know, intellect or, you know, what you can do to perform to get your credential. I realize that that's what we all want. But those students before you need you to be all present and making sure you've designed this assessment to this jargon that I'm giving you here and some of the educational jargon we're going over. I would encourage you, in fact, I plead with you to put that into your TPA, right? Formative assessment or diagnostic or whatever. Because here's the thing, those assessors are going to hear that, right? And it's going to be a trigger for them. Hey, this person knows what they're talking about, right? Selected response, essay, right? Short answer, right? Whatever it is, I would encourage you to lean back into your assessment course that you took some time ago and go back in there and look at that textbook again and look at some of those PowerPoints and pull from that and use some of that educational jargon, right? To demonstrate how you're walking students along this roadmap. So now if you're following me here on the roadmap analogy, you've got where did you start with students, right? Diagnostic, not that you have to use a diagnostic, but you might want to speak to that. Formative assessment, how I periodically checked along the way that the students are still on the same road, right? They haven't taken a detour. So before I give them that summative assessment or that formal assessment, right? Just because it's Friday, how do I know that they're on that path? Are they ready? In fact, one word I encourage you to use or phrase is student readiness. Are the students ready for the assessment? Or am I just giving it to them again because it's Friday and that's just what we do and it's the end of the unit? So these are the kinds of things, folks, listen, that they want you to be articulating. They want you to know as a reflective practitioner that you understand the importance of student readiness. That we're not just giving the exam in the same one that I pull out of some crusty folder in my file cabinet like I did 20 years ago, and here you go. They want to know is, do you know who your students are? Have you made necessary UDL instructional changes and access to meet those needs? Does that make sense? And so if you can speak that kind of ease into your annotations and your rationale, I'm telling you, you're going to sound like a professor, okay? And you're going to sound like you know what you're doing, and you do, but you have to articulate this out there. One of the things in the TPA, I'll move on, is a lot of our candidates make the mistake of simply jumping into the content or their TPA and not linking, explicitly, here are my standards. You with me? Here are the learning tasks I've assigned, the activities because of those goals. You with me? And as a result, here's the assessment to measure those goals. I'm going to say that again because it's worth stating because you need to do this, is you need to, in your rationale, we'll get to that, here were my learning goals based on the standards. Here was the activities I designed to practice those goals and to get my students there. And then here's my assessment that's looking to measure those goals so that I know they know. Is that helpful? Okay? And you want to be explicit about that because a lot of our candidates don't do that. It's just, here's what I did, here's what I did, here's what students did. But it's like, okay, but how does that measure what students are knowing and supposed to know and the goals? Did you reach your goal? So that's what they're looking for in that reflective piece. We'll get to that. All right, I'm going to move on. Okay? So as we think about step one, and a lot of you begin to look at this, and I did send out a podcast. We sent out a podcast of the very first overview. And over the next week or so, you'll get a step one. And so in step one, you'll remember that how many lessons will your video record? Bueller? How many? 3 to 5. Okay, the question's been asked is, should we video record all of them? I would urge you to do that because you don't know what you're really capturing. You don't know what's really being heard, and you don't know how things are really going to go. I would just record all 5. That would be me. Okay? But the idea is you need at least a minimum of how many, everybody? 3, right? Okay? So we want you to have 3 to 5 based on your content area that you're teaching. It's going to cover multiple days, much like any unit would. It's kind of a unit assessment plan here, right? And of course, it supports both academic language and content language, right? So their idea is that you're also talking about embedding literacy. It's students' use of technology. Again, it's not how the teacher's using technology. This is the mistake a lot of our candidates make is, but I use PowerPoint or I use this cool YouTube video. That's awesome, but that is not what they're looking for. And this is where there's a misnomer. When we say use of technology, it's not in the hands of the teacher, it's in the hands of who? The students, okay? How are they utilizing it? If you don't do this, I'm telling you, the assessor knows, they've been trained, that it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to score the 4 and the 5 range. You'll be somewhere near the 2 and 3. Correct, Dr. Beck?
Yep.
Okay? All right, so I urge you, this needs to be something about them utilizing it. Do you have to use it for every one of those 3 assessments? No. But what have you done within that unit, within those 5 lessons or so, that demonstrates that students are using technology? Maybe it has to do with the idea of using a Kahoot, or maybe they're responding with something on Padlet, if you're familiar with some of those platforms. But the idea is, what are students using to demonstrate that they know? So think assessment here. Think assessment. It's not just students creating a PowerPoint, but what are they doing as it relates to assessment, okay? Moving on. How does this support higher thinking skills? If you look at those rubrics, this is the one thing that is separating students scoring 4s and 5s, again, and scoring 2s and 3s, is how are you moving them up Bloom's taxonomy of doing and thinking, right? So if it's always level 1, level 2, regurgitating information, okay? In other words, recall and remembering, that's great. That's a good place to start. But what they're going to eventually ask you to do is where along in the assessment are you monitoring for higher order thinking skills, okay? Analyzing, predicting, creating, and that kind of thing. Is that helpful? Okay, so that's what they mean by this. Moving on from there is, remember, you're going to include a formal assessment of their understanding through the development of a product, process, right, or performance, okay? Think UDL here. So how are you, the formal assessment needs to show all the learning up to that point, okay? Think of it in a sense of more of a, how how do I periodically check along the way? We talked about that already, right? Thinking about a roadmap, how do I know? You will include your scoring criteria. So again, this is just for the formal assessment, okay? For the self-assessment and the informal, there's no need for a scoring guide or a rubric. But when you do the formal assessment, you will need to do that. You will need to know, here's how I know they know. So for example, I might say students are gonna write, I'm thinking single subject here for a minute. Students are gonna write a 5-paragraph essay with thesis, argument, and evidence. Y'all with me? Okay, I'm thinking older kids here. So I have to create a scoring guide or a rubric that has it, hey, here's a 3, here's what a 4 is, here's what a 3 would include, here's what a 4 would look like. Does that make sense? That's how specific that needs to look. Otherwise, it's just subjective, right? There's no, okay, you did good. Well, what does that mean? So remember again, when you do the formal assessment, this needs to be a rubric that students have in advance, okay? Not after the fact, okay? But in advance, how are you gonna score this thing? And then finally, a big piece of this step 1 here is sharing the result of assessment with detailed feedback. Let me say this quickly, and I'll move on. I don't want to get my teacher soapbox too much. But feedback, research has shown, is the single greatest, listen, single greatest. Okay, meta-analysis has been done by people like Robert Marzano and John Hattie. The single greatest factor affecting student achievement is the teacher. The single greatest factor that a teacher does is feedback. Okay, so the feedback that you give to students along that road, right, to Mexico, or if you will, is, hey, yes, you're doing well on this, or hey, you need to include this here, or this was wrong, I can see why you thought that, here's actually what we're aiming for. So it's that informal and formal feedback that you're giving to students along the way that lets them know whether they're still on the road to Mexico. Does that make sense? So feedback is critical. In other words, they're going to be asking, when you did that self-assessment and you got back feedback from the students, what feedback did they get to let them know that either they got it or didn't get it, or what they can do better next time? Does that make sense? So this is not a one and done, here's an assessment like typically happens, right? Like here you go, you got an A, peace out. It's, okay, you got a C, here's why. Let's look back at the test again, right? Or as a teacher, as a reflective practitioner, I'm saying, hey, students really missed this one standard, and I need to go back and reteach. That'll be part of your reflective piece. So I'll stop there about feedback. But again, you're wanting to do what's best for students. So when you do this TPA, remember, get in with both feet, right? Don't just do a dog and pony, but really try to think, am I really periodically letting students know along the way where they're at as well, so that it can inform me about what to do next? Does that make sense? Questions? Do you have any questions from the audience at all? Are we good to go? Yeah.
When it comes to math, like doing math, how do you do like your recruiting for math? You're right, if they get it wrong, you don't really have like literacy, right?
That's a great question. So the question was asked is, what about an area or content area of math, right? Especially if you're a lot of multiple subject folks or SPED that are going to be setting up a math lesson is, how do you create a rubric? I don't know that it's necessary that you have a rubric for math unless you're doing a performance task. If you're doing a performance task, right, then I would argue that there is a rubric you can use. But if you're thinking about a standardized test, if you often think about math, right, 20 questions, you can still create a scoring guide of some sort saying that, hey, you know what, again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but you could still say if students score at least a 70 or more, right, that's going to be proficient, okay? But keep in mind, folks, and I don't want to steal Dr. Backrack's thunder, I'm sure she's going to go over this. Go back in your mind to the class you took on assessment, and you might recall something called item analysis. You remember this? Item analysis was the idea that, hey, questions 1 through 4 are all about this standard. You with me so far? Stay with me. And questions 5 through 8 were about this standard. What you want to be able to do is dissect or aggregate that data. So let's say it's a 20-question math test, and 1 through 4, the students killed it, man. They were awesome. But 5 through 8, the wheels fell off, right? Well, as a reflective practitioner, I have to go back and go, hey, these questions here were addressed to this standard. They didn't do well on that standard. What activities did I do in class that addressed that standard, and why didn't students get it? That's what they're looking for in the TPA. That's it right there. That's the magic key, is you as a reflective practitioner to aggregate some of that stuff and go, where did they do well, where did they didn't do well, and what would I go back and do differently? I'm going to hand things back over to Dr. Backrack. Here it is. They are not looking for a perfect unit or a perfect lesson or a perfect video recording. That's not it. They want to know that even if the wheels fell off in your lesson, right, or assessment, that you were able to go back and go, I see where things went wrong. This is what I would do differently. If you can articulate that, I'm going to tell you right now, you will pass the TPA. You will. That's the critical component there is can you go back and reflect and break that down as a reflective practitioner? What are the questions?
So, I didn't hear the beginning part. So are we using different students or are we using the same students?
Well, there aren't three focused students as you think of before. In other words, the one with special needs, ELL, and so forth. Rather, and I'm going to, Dr. Backrack address this, you're really talking about collecting 3 areas of assessment. So one low, one they met the objective or goal, and then one that exceeded. So I'll let Dr. Backrack speak to
Your
that.
question might be similar to one online, which was, can we use the same class of students? And yes, you can. In fact, if you're using the same class, prior to delving into your lesson, you're going to give that contextual information about your students, kind of to get to know you, who's in your class, what are their skills and assets, what are their needs. If you're using the same class, you're essentially going to use the same information you gathered from your first cycle 1. You just have to take it from there and put it into this assessment, okay? It can be the same class and same information from both cycles, okay?
Online folks, hopefully you got that, and that was the idea that you can use that same classroom profile that you did for TPA 1 as well as TPA 2.
There's a couple other online questions, so I'm going to speak them out for your benefit as well. Does educational technology count if it's a student doing a math problem in their educational technology program that they're using for math? And my answer to that was yes, as long as the technology is in the student's hands, and it can be, an online math program or online game, and it can be for learning as well as for assessment, is my understanding.
Yep.
So that's good. And let's see. Oh, if we're working with younger students, say math, can we use the answer key instead of a rubric? And the answer to that is yes. If you're uploading either of those, so you have, if you have the teacher's answer guide, right? That can be what you upload if those are the answers to your test that you're giving.
So speaking to that, if you create your answer key, that would be available.
Yep. Right. And which is often the case, because sometimes I would think, okay, we're ready for these questions on this quiz, even if it's created by a publisher, but we're not ready for these yet, these other questions. So I would kind of cut and paste from the teacher's manual quiz to the needs of my students. Yeah. Good. All right, let's see. Okay, do we have to submit comprehensive lesson plans? Let me go, if we can go back one slide, we can actually show you what you're going to be turning in. This is the document here. The learning segments, I think. Okay.
So folks online, this is that template that either was already sent to you or certainly you can find online.
It's linked in that slide we were just on, the first part. And so this is what you're going to be turning in. So you don't have to upload lessons like you did, a lesson like you did last time. You're filling out this template for all of the lessons. So here's your learning segments and your goals for the unit. And then lesson 1, here's what you're filling out. Lesson 2, what you're filling out. Okay, so the lessons are actually a part of the template. Does that make sense and answer the question?
So online folks, I don't know if you captured that, but this template here is what you're completing, much like last time where you had a lesson plan that you uploaded. You're actually just completing these boxes instead. So it's already here for you. That graphic organizer set, you're just typing into the prompt boxes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
For each of the lessons.
And of
Remember,
course that
there's 3 to 5.
opens up.
And it opens up,
Yeah.
of course.
Okay?
That is on the website.
Yeah, it's also in the folder I just gave you access to. So you're going to actually fill this in and upload it to Pearson.
I just noticed on that form it says ELD and ALD. In lesson 3, if you go down like
Right here?
Right here.
Sorry, okay.
I'm not sure. Alternative language?
Academic.
Okay, probably.
Academic language development. That's what it is. A+.
Awesome. Very, very good.
Nice job.
Okay. All right.
So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague. I would just remind you on this slide here, everybody, that you're going to submit a blank copy of one formal assessment instrument, okay? So you're not required to upload the self-assessment or the informal assessment, but the formal assessment does need to be uploaded as evidence. Your rubric and scoring criteria as well. So again, how you're going to score that thing. Again, this would all be given to students in advance. Remember the scoring guide or the how they're going to assess. But the idea is you have that copy as well uploaded. And then, of course, you would complete that learning segment that Dr. Backrack just showed you a moment ago. So I'll turn that over to you.
Okay. And there's a couple other questions there. One of them that I just glanced at was, can we use the same video from the first cycle? And in first cycle, you just videotaped yourself doing a single lesson. This one's multiple lessons. And for most of you, it has to be an opposite subject matter. So I don't think so. You're doing a whole new cycle at this point, to be fair, okay? And these links are live, so if you want to see what you're going to submit related to assessment description, because you're describing those kind of assessments we talked about, and that contextual information is that gets to know you that you already did for cycle 1. So after you're planning your lesson, then you're going to go ahead and teach your lesson and assess your students. So again, that recommended that you videotape all of your lessons and back them up. Have a copy of them in multiple places so that you can access them. You should be able to, at this point, videotape the entire thing and know how to cut out small bits of it like you did for cycle 1. If you get stuck with that, and you need a resource on how to do that, email me and I can send you some online tutorials using QuickTime or other things if you need. And then you're going to be selecting these clips from your instruction, right? So you need to show your assessment strategy embedded in your instruction. During instruction, what kind of assessment is that? The assessment I do while I'm teaching? Informal, great. So as you're teaching, you're going to be asking students questions. And you're going to be asking them and you're going to videotape that. In your video clip, which again is only 5 minutes each clip, right? So you're going to be looking for these things. How you're developing that academic language in students. So to me, that means you're teaching vocabulary and kind of having them use it or practice it within your instruction, or at least have that in your mind. Students' use of educational technology, that has to be shown, right? And you providing content-specific assessment results and feedback to students. So giving students feedback, like Dr. Barsh just talked about, is something that you're going to want to have on a clip somewhere, all right? And then how you're supporting students to use their higher order thinking skills. So as Dr. Barsh mentioned, think of Bloom's taxonomy or go back to that and the questions that are associated with each level of that taxonomy. So instead of just that fact question, maybe you're asking them to apply. So students, today we've learned about informal assessment. How might you apply that in your classroom? Can you talk to each other and give me that feedback back? That would be an example of asking them a higher order thinking question and then assessing that they're understanding their content. Yeah.
Nicole?
The educational technology, I'll be doing the math portion. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to do that. Like, I know they have a couple tablets in the classroom. They have computers in the back of the classroom. I mean,
Yeah.
they're on here, you have to just review them.
Or
I guys have suggestions. of
yeah,
something to go
so a lot of schools have limited resources, and that's where you're going to rotate through stations.
about. And they have like computer lab time where they do like already. That's not speaking. Sorry.
I got frozen or something, but I'm trying to
There's no lesson that goes with
set
it.
that.
Right.
I'm not sure how to.
So I used iReady in my classroom, and the way I ended up using it was you can go into iReady and target lessons. You know how usually it just assigns lessons to students? You can override that in iReady. So if I was teaching a lesson on subtraction, let's say, then I would assign students practice on the exact lesson I was doing. So I would get that feedback about how were they doing. You could see how they were scoring. So you can do that if you want to use it, but then you'd explain that in your lesson plan that I'm going to teach a lesson on subtraction. They're going to go to the computer lab, and I'm specifically assigning students a subtraction lesson that they practice. I'll be looking at the computer generated scores to see how what their level of mastery is on that.
Could you end up using that as an assessment as well?
You can, because along the way, there's like practice, and then there's some assessment as well. iReady does give you a lot of great data on how the student is doing, exactly where they're breaking down. So you could use it that way, or you could use it as practice and not the assessment component to it.
It's number 2 on there, so they want to see the students using technology.
You will write annotations for your video clips to provide rationales and descriptions of why you're using that educational technology. And again, it doesn't have to be, you're really just kind of seeing them work on iReady, right?
For 5 minutes on iReady.
And it doesn't have to be 5 minutes. It could be a very 30-second clip or a minute clip of our students utilizing educational technology. It doesn't have to be that long.
Okay.
Okay. So, sure.
So iReady.com. It's I think it's a district.
That's a paid
Yeah.
subscription. So, but there are some other free things for sure. Go back to your ed tech stuff and look through there. Related to technology too, on the CalTPA website is some resources CUES. CUE is the Computer Using Educator website, and they have some great resources there. So I think it's CUE.org on there, and I can email it out to you as well. So, so here are just some reminders about using digital academic language, Bloom's taxonomy for your reference and educational technology. Oh, here it is. Here we go. So here, this is a clip right from CalTPA's website. So here's some resources that they have, CUE being one of them, and these are all live links that you can go to. These aren't live links on my slide. They're on CalTPA's website. I apologize for that. But that you can check out educational technology. Right. CUE being the best one there. And here, I think this link is live, so that goes to this page. All right, so you can get to the other live links. Questions about any of those things? Okay. And then what you're going to be turning in here is your annotated clips of students working and assessing in your lesson. You're also going to be submitting your informal and student self-assessment materials and criteria. So if you gave them, any materials, if it's a question, then you're just going to embed that in the lesson. If I'm just going to be asking students questions, then I might want to videotape that a little bit too, just to show them. And then you're going to analyze the informal and student self-assessment. Let's take a look at that template just to see if you have questions about it. If you're online, if you hit that link in that slide, it will take you to your list, and we're looking for analysis of assessment. So you're turning in, here are the questions that you're going to be asked. How did you use informal assessment results to learn about and support students' academic language development? So you get a specific question about that. How did you adjust your instruction based on these results? So the idea of assessment is as you are in teaching and assessing students, then you're going to adjust possibly the next lesson for that. Okay? So describe how that works. How did your in the moment informal assessment give you the opportunity to provide feedback to students to help them understand what they need to do next in order to progress toward or beyond meeting the learning goals? How did you adjust your instruction? So it's this fluid movement between how we doing and then how am I adjusting, all right? How did student self-assessment results provide insight to how the students felt they were understanding material and their progress toward the goal? So those are the 3 questions that you're going to be asked there. Let's see if there's more. Good. Okay, and then let's take a look at this one, analysis of assessment results. Okay, so that's our reflex. That's next. Question? Comments? Anything online, Dr. Barsh, we should answer?
Let's see.
Or speak out to the others?
Do my lessons have to be for the whole class, or can we do small groups?
Your lessons can be small groups as well. And in special education, sometimes that's what you have, the smaller groups. And we have not seen any pushback about that being a smaller group. The only thing is you do need to you're uploading to them a variety of, for your formal assessment. The students take the test and then you're uploading the test, you're uploading the answer key, you're also uploading students' work, their assessment. So, and they're wanting you to focus on a student who has mastered it and maybe a student who has not quite mastered it. So you're uploading different student results. So you need a large enough group that you have different level of success. Okay.
How many students are we supposed to do?
Let me go back and take a look at that. I think that's okay. So you're looking at, I believe it's 3. So a student who exceeded the goal, met the goal, and has not yet met the goal. All right. So if you have, you're probably going to have a number of students, and maybe you don't have anyone who exceeded the goal, then I would probably make note of that and upload maybe your strongest students' work at that point. And say, okay, because I didn't have anyone who really excelled and exceeded the goal, and I had several students who didn't quite meet the goal, my next instructional decision is I'm going to reteach, which is part of this. You, at the end of your formal assessment, you're going to make a decision to either do an enrichment lesson or a reteach lesson, right? So you have 3 lessons that you're teaching, or 3 to 5, and then you have 1 additional reteach or enrichment lesson.
It says number of percentage of students. It sounds like it wants the whole.
Yeah, it wants you to analyze your whole class and how many were there, but it also wants you to upload an example. Okay.
So both.
Yeah.
Both class and.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then, how many examples? 1 of each? One of each?
Let's see if it says in here. Analyze the formal assessment results for the whole class related to the learning goal and cite evidence from the assessment results submitted for 3 students. Okay, so you're uploading 3 students' assessments. Yes.
So that's where it gets really confusing with SPED, because the class I then has 9 students
Yeah.
with 1 in completely different categories, now the age.
Mm-hmm.
He's got his 28, that one.
Is he learning the same instructional goals? Or can you adapt? I mean, do you do a whole lesson?
I don't even work with him.
Okay.
And actually, that is something that maybe I
That's odd.
afterwards. Would be a whole scenario.
Yeah.
With the other 8, 3 of them are way up here.
Mhm.
Then there's a middle level.
Yep.
And there's a lower level.
Right.
They're not taught all together. They're 3 learning groups.
Right.
So to do that percentage, they have similar learning goals. but
Right.
To do this percentage thing, I don't even know how to do that, because they're all different levels.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. So if your overall unit, let's say your overall unit is subtraction or getting the main idea of a text or whatever that is, I had always, as a special education teacher, multiple groups going at all times. So I had one group who was working on, okay, it's subtraction, but it's with, manipulatives and it's simple one-digit subtraction for this group. This group might be doing, all the way up to regrouping, right? I don't call it borrowing anymore, but regrouping. So if your overall goal is that students will increase their understanding of the concept of subtraction, you might have to go that broad to hit everybody. We have a topic that we're talking about, but for this group, and in my lesson, I'd probably still differentiate. For this group, this is their learning goal. For this group, learning goal. For this group, learning goal, right? Or you can, like someone asked online, is this lesson is for this group of students. It's for these three. And so then in your analysis, you would have to say, my whole class, when I'm talking about whole class, it's special education class, I'm only zeroing in on these students for this activity. And then your data is gonna look, your percentages are gonna look really funny. But that's okay. As long as you explain it, we haven't seen that be a problem. All right. Or you can go whole class and say they have different learning goals. All right. I understand though.
Yeah.
Tricky.
So this was a similar question asked in our online forum where, again, what if I just want to target a particular group? And so just so our online folks are getting this as well, that, yeah, you can focus on one group, but just keep in mind that becomes the group that you're looking at, as you were saying, both with the self-assessment, the informal, and the formal, right? Because when they ask you to articulate that in the formal assessment, you go from that all to just that one group. It may be cumbersome or complex for the assessor to understand why you went from a whole class to this. It's not that you can't go with the whole class in the beginning. When you do that formal assessment, like you said, you just want to articulate, here's why I captured this group. Maybe they needed, special instruction or whatnot. So online folks, that was your question as well. So hopefully that was answered.
And I think that all of this information about, I have a class of 9, this TPA is going to focus on 3, is in your contextual information, that getting to know your class so that they get oriented to, oh, well, this is SPED, this is the group I have, and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So like for work samples, like you're talking about, so I've got one student I'm talking about that has its 180, he does have a subtraction goal. So could I take that sample?
If he's part of your lesson.
Okay, so he's not, but, okay, so but they all have a subtraction goal. All 9 of them. And then, do I utilize a few of their pieces of work to upload or just those 3?
I think I would upload things that related to your instruction.
Sorry if you don't mind repeating the question.
Oh, sure. The question, if I can articulate it well, I'm sorry. The question was, if I'm teaching the whole group on subtraction,
They all have
a goal.
of subtraction.
They all have a goal of subtraction.
All 9 of them.
Yep.
But if I'm gonna focus, like you said, focus on the 3, because that's the learning group I'm with, then are those the ones that I'm gonna upload some samples from?
All right, so repeating the question was, if I'm focusing on a small group, can I upload assessments from the whole group or just focus on the 3?
Or should I?
Or should you? Here's my answer is they want to see a consistent understanding of, this was my lesson plan, which is just for the 3, right? Your student self-assessment, informal assessment, and formal assessment that fits your lesson that you gave. So if your lesson was only focused on 3 and all of a sudden you pulled from something else, I think that would be confusing to the assessor.
And that'll come up actually later. There was a question asked in our audience, virtual folks, and that is, maybe there's a group that you go, man, these folks really maybe need this retaught or revisited. That'll come in that step 3 and 4 when you do the reflect and apply, right? Because you might not necessarily need to reteach a concept to the whole of the students. That's perfect for step 3 and 4 to just say, hey, these 3 students didn't meet that learning goal. Now I'm gonna, maybe pull them aside and and go through that lesson with them again. It's a good question.
Okay, I think we're good.
We're good?
Yeah.
Any other questions online? Are we okay?
There was one question, what if my materials for informal and self-assessment are not on paper? Do I just type the question used into a document? Yes, you can certainly do that. Because often those are not paper, pencil stuff. Or in your lesson plan, you're going to be planning the questions that you're asking your class. So you can put it also in your lesson plan. I'm going to be checking for understanding by asking a variety of questions here, including blah, 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 blah. And then either videotape yourself doing that, or it's at least in the lesson. So they're looking for evidence somewhere in the CalTPA.
Yeah, for our P folks, I know there's a lot of you out there, or even our band folks, some visual and performing arts folks.
Yeah.
This becomes a little bit more difficult because maybe you're not using a lot of written assessments. But that's okay. What you do is you have the opportunity to, as you said, Dr. Bacharach, still capture that in the video recording. Right? I'd be more intentional if I were you as a visual and performing arts or PE folk, is to say, I'm going to capture this in the recording, because then I can go ahead and annotate that and give that rationale. If for some reason you don't capture that in the recording, you're still okay. I would type that out in no uncertain terms, the way that you worked through that informal assessment, and still what you did, what you got back from them as well. So there still needs to be some evidence other than just, I had students look at one another to see if they can dribble a basketball and tell them good job, thumbs up, thumbs down. It needs to be more than that, but how did you walk them through that? So, but again, I think the video recording is going to be your best friend if you're a visual performing arts band and or PE. Question in the back.
Okay, so I'm performing arts and band, so I just wanted to back up from questions before I want to check. So more like a formal assessment with band is always usually like a performance based after the playing test. And so it's like we're supposed to submit then, or do I have like how to submit them, different things for each one?
So the question that was asked, if I understand this correctly, we have a band teacher in the room here, and they were asking questions about, because of the nature of your content area was more skill-based, right? Students are performing something to demonstrate mastery. The question is more or less, can I use an assessment there's a criteria or a grading rubric or checklist? Can I use that as evidence? Is that correct? Yeah, the answer is absolutely. Yeah, because what happens is even though you band teachers are saying, hey, I heard that, or I gathered that, and cognitively I was able to say, hey, you need to do this different, right? And it's kind of on the spot, right? And that does happen oftentimes very informally. In fact, you're doing that probably dozens of times each class, right? That's awesome. But in that formal sense, you want to make sure that there's some kind of criteria that's been written out. And it sounds like you already do this, where students are privy to that, knowing that they're going to be assessed a certain way. And then you actually are writing that out, even if it's kind of a check or whatever way that you do that, whether it's a scale of 1 to 3, they did 3 well, but making sure that students have that in advance. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, oh, kind of. It's just because I know they have the bullet points that says you need to submit a blank copy of one formal assessment and then a rubric or scoring criteria. So I just want to make sure if I just turn in like the rubric for both, that would be okay.
I think in what the assessment looks like, I would type up what you're asking them to do in the performance.
Okay.
Yeah. And then your rubric about how you're grading what you asked them to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that question is a really good one about, okay, I'm going to submit my rubric, or I'm going to submit my criteria, but what about the student sample itself, right? In other words, if they're performing something, and Dr. Bacharach was articulating that, what we should do then is type up in no uncertain terms, once again, on a Word document, here's what I was asking the students to do in that performance.
Okay.
Yep, good question.
There was a question online too that I believe can be helpful as well for students who are doing, I believe this is PE, and the student was saying that the private school has spotty Wi-Fi. I believe it's an outside PE stuff. She uses her own phone to show YouTube videos, but what else could she do? Because you showing a video isn't what they mean by educational technology. So if you think about educational technology in a PE activity, so you get kind of creative there, how can you utilize that? And I've seen some teachers use
say a camera or a iPad to film students doing a function, a skill, and then them being able to watch themselves back and sort of self-assess. I mean, one student videotapes the other student, and then they switch. And then that's kind of part of your self-assessment, or the student's self-assessment. So you look at your form, can you see if you were doing it correctly or incorrectly? You could almost combine those two things together.
Yeah,
Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a number. I have a lot of PE candidates for clinical, and a lot of what they'll do now is using these various like Fitbit, and those kinds of technology platforms to kind of monitor themselves regarding their physical activity. That's a great one too, of course. So.
Yeah.
Hopefully, PE folks, those are some ideas that maybe you're already using or maybe plan to use.
Or this kind of blended PE and math for us, because we would go out and we would, they would count how many, they could do, or they would run the mile and record their time, and over a series of lessons to see if their time increased. Then they'd chart it, so it kind of combined, and they'd use Excel sort of to do that. So those are a couple of ideas. And there's another question online, but I think you're going to cover it.
Okay.
So
All right.
we'll wait.
That question online, folks, if we don't cover it, let us know. So step 3, step 1 is what again? Yeah, the plan, right? The kind of the, right. So if you can go idea of plan, teach, assess, reflect, right? Step 3, reflect. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to analyze the student products, and this is where it's going to take some of that what we call item analysis. So beg, borrow, and steal that, right? Write it in your paper. Okay, even if it's not in the traditional sense, right? Digital and performing arts band folks, this particular item that they had to write, it could be a particular skill they had to do.
Right.
Okay, but how will you aggregate that performance and or that multiple choice test, you name it? But how will you aggregate that and say students did well on that standard or that learning goal as opposed to, well, they didn't do so well here? So that's what they mean here about analyzing their product or that process or that performance using, again, that rubric or scoring criteria. So you need to have that like front and center when you gather that evidence of those student assessments, right? And looking at your rubric going, okay, now how do I know they know that they met that goal or that standard? So you're going to do this, obviously, by summarizing on that table you just saw a moment ago where students were either not met, or exceeded. I think is the terminology they use in that last category. You're going to want to put their kind of like tally marks, if you will, or some kind of number there. Hey, 10 students didn't meet, 12 did, and 13 exceeded or whatever. So that's where that information will go. But they're going to ask you to kind of find out how did you go about arriving at that. Now bullet point number 2 there. Remember, you're going to submit how many student work? How many samples? 3, right? Okay, so you're going to submit 3 student formal assessments. Talk about formal assessment now. 3 formal assessments, and you're going to have 1 student who exceeded the learning goals. Okay. So, by the way, who sets the proficiency level? You do, right? So if you determine that students need to score a 3 out of 4 on this rubric, whether it's performance-based, right, or some kind of essay, or it's 70% on a multiple choice test, you set that. So if it was 70%, let's say on a 10-question quiz, let's just say, well then, students who got 8, 9, or 10, you with me, would be exceeding. A met might be a student who got a 7, and then of course anyone who got a 6 or below would be not met. Does that make sense? You've got to set that proficiency level. And by the way, for those of you who've taken, I know my class and many of our other classes, is in your objective, it should be measurable, right? If you've had me before, we've talked about setting SMART goals. And so what I'm saying is make sure when you go to articulate your SMART goals, that there's a proficiency level that you can come back to. Because what I see oftentimes is a lot of our candidates, and even some veteran teachers out there, nobody from the specific course, but other people, will put things, students will learn about photosynthesis. Okay, they'll learn about, well, how do you measure that? Because what's always taught is not necessarily what's caught. Y'all, you hear me? So how do you know they know? Well, if you set a proficiency level of students will diagram photosynthesis, right, or write a paragraph about it using a 3 out of 4, rubric, well, then you know whether they met it or not. So make sure that's written into your objectives, and you can go back to that as proof text. Okay, that's critical. And this goes as well for visual and performing arts, because you can say, I want my students to be able to do such and such proficiency level. Or keep in mind, a lot of times for our candidates, our students, folks, is it's not really a number as much as either they can or they can't. Does that make sense? So for you folks back there, either they can dribble the basketball or they can play that note or they can't. And that's okay to make it just one or the other, but that needs to be articulated in the objective. Does that help?
Well, actually, yeah, I was gonna ask for them to submit it first with the formal assessment for the 3 students, but I just be submitting the rubrics that I use to grade those students, maybe it's like a student, like, so like a student got like above, and then you go middle, and
That's correct.
okay.
So for you PE folks, and I'm gonna make sure I get this right, you can submit your scoring guide that you filled out for that one student that met, not met, whatever. But then make sure what I would do is I would attach a document showing why they didn't meet. In other words, what did that student do that was exceeded or met or not met? You don't want to just turn in something that has an arbitrary number there or a check and go, here's my evidence that they met or didn't meet, because they're going to wonder, well, how does that fit?
So maybe it's like leave a comment.
Yeah, just in the comment section below, I would write down for each of those 3 students. That's a good question.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so again, this is the reflection part. This is what they're all about, okay? This is the part you want to kill it and hit it out of the park. It's this one here. This is where you need to demonstrate this is, how do I know students know? And how do I know that we're on the road to get to Mexico? Or do we somehow take a detour, right? And end up in, the middle of the Arctic, North Pole. So this is where you're able to say, I know that they know, and here's what I'm going to do next. So reflect on what you've discovered about student learning and academic progress based on your analysis, again, of both the informal and formal assessments, including self-assessment results. So at this point, you're looking at all of those 3 types of assessments, and feel free to look at others, although I would probably keep it simple if it was me, and just focus on that self-assessment, informal and formal, and go, now that I've gathered all this information, okay, not just those 3 students, but as a class even, did we make it? Did we arrive in Mexico? Okay, or did we get off sidetracked somewhere? And if we didn't, how do I know that they got there? That's what they're looking for in this piece here. It goes on and says, describe what was most and least effective about teaching and assessment, as well as a target for increasing your instructional effectiveness. So you might go back to a particular lesson where maybe you were supposed to lean into a little bit more about the, let's say, the reasons why Rome fell. And as you did that, you recognize, man, you know what? I didn't really clearly explain inflation. You with me? We're back in history days, okay? Or maybe I was talking about, using a certain formula in math, and I can see where the wheels fell off in step 2. And I could have done a better job in that lesson. That's kind of what they're looking for. Questions in the audience first? Thoughts? Nothing? Okay. Questions online at all, Dr. Becker?
There's just a question of whether you could use centers, and yes, you can. If you do any whole group instruction first, I would put that in my lesson, and then why you're dividing into smaller groups. But that's absolutely fine. Nope, I think there's one other question, but we'll get there.
Okay, so I'm going to turn things over. I would just remind you, as far as what you're going to turn in for step 3, you're going to turn in how many assessments? 3, right? The 3 formal assessments. Okay, we're not talking about self-assessment. We're not talking about informal. We're talking about the 3 formal assessments of the 3 students, right? 1 that didn't meet, good. 1 that met, and 1 that exceeded. Okay. All right, you guys are experts. Gene.
I have a question.
Yep.
So, again, since I missed a little bit, at the beginning, we turn in the blank one, that's what we're getting blank, and then this is gonna be what they are getting.
That's correct.
And so then we're also gonna have the scoring guide.
Yep.
And then we're gonna describe at some point the narratives of our expectations.
That's right. That's right. So the question was asked in the audience, so we're turning in a blank copy of that scoring rubric or that assessment we gave them. Let's just assume it was a photocopy of some 10 questions. Yeah, you're going to submit that in segment 1, or excuse me, the learning segment, which is step 1. And then in step 2 or 3 here, you're going to submit the actual student work, those 3 students. And then yes, you're going to submit an analysis or a written narrative of, hey, here's where my results and here's what happened there, and here's why I know. Yeah. Is that helpful, Gene? Well, I'm going to turn things over for our very last step here, step 4, Dr. Becker.
Okay, so based on your analysis of how students did in your class, for your either whole class or your small group instruction, then you're going to make a decision on what your next step will be. And it, as I mentioned, it'll either be a reteach activity or it'll be an extension activity. All right, so these are kind of described here. And describe your plan for those activities. So it's another little lesson that you're going to be giving. The question online that we sort of were skipping was, can this be for a small group? And yes, typically it would be for either the group that is exceeded, you pull them for an enrichment activity, or you could do enrichment for the whole class if everyone did well. But often you'll see a small group of students who are struggling to master your skill or objective, and you're pulling them only. So typically it is a small group that you're doing. And you're going to videotape that extra lesson as well. Okay?
So 3, so this will be 4.
Fourth video. Yep. So your fourth video. All right, so video record the reteacher extension and submit one video clip that demonstrates how you adjusted or built on your previous lesson. So if we're teaching subtraction, these little ones didn't get it. So how am I going to shift things around a little bit? Maybe I'm going to pull in manipulatives at this point, or I'm going to teach a different strategy that might be helpful for that group. Okay, so it should be a little bit different than your first instruction.
I just want to clarify. We're doing 3 lessons, right?
Yeah.
We have 3 lessons. This is going to be like our adjustment. So not necessarily a lesson, but just how we like provide like additional support.
Yeah, but it will be, there's a template that you're going to fill in. But it is it's a mini lesson for that group.
So is it one of the 3?
No,
Or is it some
It's the next one, yes.
strategy to reteach?
Let's take a look at what it actually looks like. Okay, that'll make it clearer. So there's a template for that reteach activity. Let's go to it. Oh, thank you. Okay. And just to clarify, actually there's 5 video clips for this. So there's four video clips in your initial series of lessons, 3 to 5, because remember you're looking at several different things there. You're looking for higher order thinking, educational technology, informal questioning, academic language. All of those are clips from your lesson, and your final is from this reteach or extension lesson. Okay, so you're going to, here's the question. This activity is for, it can be full class or small group, indicate that. What goal you're working on. So from your analysis, maybe it wasn't the entire, probably not the entire unit that you need to focus on, but maybe students weren't regrouping properly, right? So that would be your goal. So it's a little bit smaller usually. Briefly describe the activities, including the use of educational technology as appropriate and how it will develop or extend students' deep understanding of your skill and or academic language. And why did you pick that particular learning activity? So it's rationale. Okay, so and linking it back, because my students were not regrouping correctly, I noticed that they were making this error, blah, blah, blah. I decided to reteach this lesson using this strategy. Okay, so you're linking it to the evidence from the assessment, why you did it. And then any instructional adaptations or accommodations to the activity that you're using is listed here as well. All right, so it's a little mini lesson.
The reteaches.
The reteaches.
So in the 3 to 5 total,
Mm-hmm.
that's 3 to 5 total that you're submitting for the assignment to,
Mm-hmm.
includes like the technology portion.
Mhm.
Can you make like, you say those that are like the.
Yeah, so ed technology, students using that, academic language development, higher order thinking skills, and your kind of feedback to students are those 4 things that you're annotating for. Okay.
Dr. Bubba, would it be okay if we put that from the overview, the step 2, those little 4,
Mm-hmm.
were those up earlier?
I think so.
They were, okay.
I think so. But if not, we can.
Okay, I didn't know if they were.
I believe they are.
Are those the, you know, you're talking.
Yeah, let me go back.
I was typing, so I didn't hear.
Right here.
Yeah.
Here's your 4.
Was it the 4 times?
That you need to write annotations for, yeah.
Yeah, you did talk about that, yeah. So if that makes sense, everybody, how many clips total? There's 5 clips, right? 5 clips total. Folks online, make sure you gather that. That's 5 clips. There's the 4 here that Dr. Backrack just had up. Okay, and then there's that last clip of the reteaching or enrichment or extension, right? In step 4.
Oh, that previous one. Okay. I think I already gave this warning, but I'll say it again. Multiple subject, make sure that you're utilizing the other lesson. So if it's math and literacy, you're alternated. And the other thing is, Dr. Bartholio wants us to make sure that if you submitted cycle 1, there's a code there that says, I'll get the numbers wrong, but say it was 521 literacy. The next time you take your test, it will be 522 math, because make sure that those numbers are kind of sequential. So it's not the 622, right? Because I don't even know, it shouldn't allow you to default to the wrong assessment, but make sure that I would take almost a screenshot of what you submitted, right? Or which one you're registering for. And you're registering for the equivalent number for the next one, but the other subject, right? We've had some students make errors in uploading too large a clip. So maybe they uploaded their entire lesson unit. So don't do that, because it'll just come back not scored. They won't even look at anything else. They'll just say, send back. You'll have to resubmit $150 again, okay, to get that scored. So make sure your clips are appropriate length. Yeah. Okay. And what else? I had something else in my brain. Just lost it. Make sure you save everything. Make a copy, download a copy of your documents and your video files. Make sure it's saved for a number of reasons. One is there's always, things that go awry. I had one student last time whose fiance accidentally deleted her video. So if you have it on your phone.
Do they still get married?
I think so. Not sure. So on the phone, and you download it to your computer, keep it on your phone a while. Just keep it there. Or make an extra copy, because you're editing in QuickTime. It makes you kind of save it as another file. But if you're editing, you might lose the entire thing and need it again in the future. God forbid you don't pass and you need to remediate something. You'll need to go back to that video and maybe gather a different clip that was maybe more demonstrative of what they were needing to see. So if you're a special education candidate, remember, if for some reason you do not pass this assessment, you will be remediating internally and you'll be uploading all those documents to an APU faculty at that point. Also, we've had a percentage of students who do not complete the CalTPA in clinical practice. You are required, that's part of your clinical practice responsibility, to get this accomplished in clinical practice. It's also in your very, very best interest to do that, because the cut score right now is what? The cut score, the score that you have to get. 2. You can get 1-1, but everything else has to be a 2, and your average has to be a 2, right? To pass. This is the last opportunity that your cut score is going to be a 2. It's going up in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So your chances of passing are reduced if you don't get it in during the summer. Not that we think any of you are really probably going to get a 2, because that's a pretty low score, actually. We're hoping that everyone's are like 3s, 5s, 4s up there, and that's typically what we've seen. Where people get to is they're just very minimal. They just submit things that aren't clear. The lesson doesn't flow. They haven't connected it to the assets and needs of their students. Their assessment is kind of off what they taught in the lesson. That's when people, it's just kind of, you don't like to write. So you submit something with blanks, or those are people who've not passed at this point. So I'm sure we'll all do well, but it's okay. I mean, there is a limit to how long the templates can be. I think that it'll say on the top, limited to three pages or 5 pages or whatever. So be succinct, but link it. Because this, I did this. That rationale part, okay? Any other questions or comments?
Yes. I'll admit, I have not submitted the first one yet.
Yes.
I'm almost there.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's okay. If you have questions on cycle 1, you can ask those as well.
So it says the lesson template, and you download all the pieces, and then you can do one.
Yeah.
Their lesson template is optional, so
Yes.
the task streams of it,
That's okay.
and then uploading that.
Yep.
That's what I have, I'm ready to do
That's
that.
absolutely
And then you
fine.
just do all the rationale of their pieces.
Yes.
I've done almost all of that, I'm ready, I just want to ask them to make corrections.
Yes, that's fine. For the cycle 1, I'll repeat the question. Can you use the task stream lesson plan for cycle 1? In cycle 1, you're doing one lesson, and you can use their template, but you can also use anything you're comfortable using and just upload that. So it's a little bit different. For cycle 2, there's the lesson is sort of abbreviated, and you're typing it right into the templates. Okay.
So since I haven't even looked at,
Yeah.
I haven't looked at anything for cycle 2, all and any of the numbers or things, so is it, since we're gonna go to 3, right, so is it actual lesson plans? Like I said, I guess, like, I haven't looked at anything.
If you look at their template, it's asking you similar questions as the task stream does. It's like, what is your learning goal for this lesson? What is your grouping and your rationale for the grouping? What are the activities the students are going to do? It walks you through it.
But you use those ones.
You use that.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Differentiation. It's all there. Okay. Alright. Anything else?
Can I ask about annotating for the video clips for cycle 1? So I know in the PowerPoint it said that you want us to have annotations about like how we're supporting the focus students in the lesson.
Yeah.
So, that's like only doing 3-5 minutes, but we just have to have at least one annotation of us like supporting the focus student in the lesson because we can't get all 3 notes in the lesson.
Yes. That's correct. That's correct. And the rest of it they'll see in your lesson plan.
All right, okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? How about online? Anybody?
No, I put any last questions.
Okay.
This is it, online folks. Any last questions?
We are early.
Yeah.
Awesome. And obviously feel free to email us. You can email us directly, Dr. Bacharach, Dr. Barsh, or through the SOE TPA website as well. I think if there's any other particular errors that people have made in the past. Warnings. Oh, don't wait till the last deadline. So if you're trying to submit by deadline to get the results back, don't wait to start to upload until 11:30 that night, because things happen. And it doesn't take it, or and they don't care at all. If you're 12:01, it's not going to be scored until a month later. So I know many of you are excited and ready, and you're at the finish line for your credential, and will be employed in the fall. So you'll need these results back ASAP too. So
That was my question. So since I haven't submitted cycle 1, but, cycle 2, because we have,
yeah,
I'm submitting that next, couple days.
Yeah.
that's okay, but
Yeah.
then as long as it's done before May 1st.
Yes, you have to have submitted both by the end of clinical practice. You have submitted. You don't need to have scores back yet. That, I mean, once you pass, then your credential will be released, but for clinical practice, you just need to submit. Don't submit a blank page though. That doesn't count.
You say how you want it.
Don't submit a blank page until you submit it. That doesn't count. Because they're going to be revisiting us anyway, so that won't be fun. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy your beautiful spring day. Driving over here, didn't you just like the hills are so beautiful?
It's incredible.
It's so clear and clean. Take a
Poppies.
Huh?
Poppies.
Poppies, yes, they're beautiful. They're beautiful. And celebrate that, I know you're all stressed, but celebrate that you're almost there. You're there. It's the final push. You just have, what, 7 weeks? Go. All right, thanks, everybody.
You know what? Apparently there's some, oh, sorry.
Was there some online questions?
Oh, what happens if you exceed the maximum amount of pages?
I think they stop reading.
Okay. So yeah, don't exceed the maximum amount of pages. The assessor will stop reading. Taji, I hope you got that question answered. And it's not that you lose points, they just won't finish grading it. So I wonder if they can't see our questions anymore. Gina, I just saw them, thank you. And I think we're all good. Any last questions online, folks? Gina asked, are these clips annotated like cycle 1, where we can have these components throughout all 5 video clips? And the answer is yes, Gina.
Yeah.
You can definitely have them throughout. So yeah, it's pretty much the same platform that way.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing else. All right, bye everybody.
Bye.